Welcome back to the Night Shift, Episode 3. By the end of my second week, I had developed a system. It was not a complicated system. It was not the kind of system that required planning or strategy or any particular intelligence. It was simply the set of rules that a person assembles automatically when they are trying to survive a situation that did not come with an instruction manual. Rule 1. Arrive at 6. Leave at 11. Not 6 in a minute. Not 11 in 30 seconds. 6 and 11 with the same reliability that the sun rises and the tide comes in, because I had noticed in my first 2 weeks that the house responded to consistency the way a living thing responds to being fed on schedule. It settled, it breathed, and I needed the house settled because a restless house was a house that made sounds I did not want to investigate. Rule 2. The east corridor did not exist. I had looked at it once, on day 3, just a glance as I passed the entrance to it, long and dark, wall sconces too dim to reach the far end, and at that far end, a door with a lock on it that did not look like it belonged to this century, heavy and strange, and covered in markings I did not recognize, and did not want to. I had turned around and walked back the way I came, and I had not looked at the east corridor since, and I did not plan to. Rule 3. Do not touch the desk. I had not touched the desk. I would not be touching the desk. The desk was not my concern. Rule 4, and this one I made up myself. It was not in his list of instructions. It was something I arrived at through careful personal observation over 14 evenings. Do not look at Mr. Martin's face for more than 3 seconds at a time. 3 seconds is appreciation. 4 seconds is a problem. 5 seconds and something happens in my brain that I do not have a clean word for, and that I was absolutely not going to examine too closely while I was at my place of employment. I was managing, mostly. Mrs. Adela had become the fixed point in the strangeness of it all. Every evening she fed me without asking, talked to me without requiring anything in return, and told me the things about the house that were not in any list of instructions, but that mattered. Which rooms went cold at certain hours, the fact that the lights in the east wing flickered sometimes, but it was only old wiring, probably, the way the house made a particular sound just before dawn that she had stopped noticing after the first few years. How long has he been here? I asked her one evening. In this house. She considered the question the way she considered everything, without hurry. As long as I have known him, she said. And longer before that. I thought about the photograph I had not found yet. That comes later. And I did not ask the follow-up question that was sitting behind my teeth. What is he like? I asked instead, when there is nobody here. She smiled at her pot. The same, she said. He is always the same. My interactions with Mr. Martin at this point were still brief and structured in the way that a formal document is structured, where everything is in the correct place and nothing is present that was not put there deliberately. He came to the receiving room each evening to check the correspondence. He gave me tasks in precise language that left no room for interpretation. He did not do small talk. He barely did medium talk. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they are still forming an opinion about and have not yet committed to a position on. But he had started to linger, not in any way that could be pointed to and named, not in any way that would hold up if I tried to explain it to someone else. Just, he would come to check the correspondence and then remain in the doorway for a moment after he had already seen what he needed to see. Or he would pass through a room I was working in, and his pace would ease slightly, just slightly, like something in the room had caught a frequency he was not expecting before he moved on. I told myself I was imagining it. Then came the Thursday, day 11 of my employment. For those keeping count, and I want to be precise about this because it matters, because this was the moment the shape of things between us began to change, even if neither of us said so. I was on the floor of the receiving room. I know how that sounds, but there was a letter that had slipped behind the heavy cabinet against the wall, and I could see the edge of it from where I was standing, and it was going to bother me until I retrieved it. So I got down on my hands and knees and then flat on my stomach and reached my arm under the cabinet as far as it would go and started talking to myself the way I always do when no one is listening. Come on. I can see you right there. Why are you so far back? That is... okay. That is a dust situation under here. That is a significant dust situation. Mrs. Adela is never going to know about this. I am never going to tell her. Okay, there you are. There is the letter. Almost. I got the letter. I rolled over to sit up. Mr. Martin was standing in the doorway. I do not know how long he had been there. His expression was the one I had come to think of as his default, composed, unreadable, giving nothing away for free, except there was something else in it this time, something small and new that I had not seen there before. His head was tilted approximately 2 degrees to the right. His eyes were doing something that I did not have a name for yet. I held up the letter. The letter, I said, very professional, extremely composed. I was lying on the floor of his receiving room with dust on my hoodie, but I had the letter, and I felt this was the important thing. He looked at the letter, then at me, then... The corner of his mouth moved, just barely, just for half a second. The smallest, most controlled, most reluctant, almost smile I had ever seen on any face in my entire life, like the expression had started happening before he could decide whether to allow it, and he had caught it at the last possible moment. And then it was gone, and he said, very evenly, "Tea is ready," and left. I sat on the floor of the receiving room for a moment. Mrs. Adela appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later with my cup, actually smiling, and said nothing, and handed it to me. "Did you see that?" I said. "I didn't see anything," she said. I drank my tea on the floor. That night at 11, I said goodnight to Mrs. Adela at the front door and went down the front steps, and I was halfway to the gate when I heard it behind me. Quiet. Almost not there. Tony? I turned around. He was standing in the open doorway. The amber light from inside the house framed him from behind, and his face was half in shadow, and he was looking at me with that expression I could never fully decode, and he said, "The East Corridor. Stay away from it. Not as a rule, as a warning. There are things in this house that are mine to manage. That is one of them." I looked at him standing in that doorway. There was something underneath the evenness of his voice, something that was not cold and was not warm, but was something else, something older and more careful than either of those things, something that sounded, if I was being honest with myself, like concern. "Okay," I said. He nodded once and went back inside, and the door closed. I stood at the gate for a moment before I went through it. A rule is about control. A rule says, do this, because I have decided you should. But a warning is something different. A warning says, do this because something could happen to you if you don't. A warning means someone has thought about what could happen to you and found the thought unpleasant enough to say something about it. I walked home thinking about the difference. I think he was trying to keep me safe, which, if I'm being completely honest, was the most frightening thing that had happened to me since I started working there. Because frightening I could manage, strange I could manage, cold and unreadable and ancient and beautiful I was, apparently developing strategies for managing, but someone trying to keep me safe. That one I did not have a rule for yet. It happened on a Wednesday. I have noticed that nothing in my life that has permanently changed the way I understand something has ever happened on a pleasant day. Not a Friday, when you are loose and ready for anything. Not a Sunday, when everything is slow and forgiving. Always a Wednesday, always the middle of the week when your guard is down just enough and you're too tired to brace for anything, and the world takes that as an invitation. It was week 6. I had settled into the rhythms of the mansion, the way you settle into anything strange when you spend enough time with it. Not comfortably exactly, but familiarly. I knew which floorboards on the second landing announced themselves when you stepped on them. I knew that the receiving room got cold from the east side first. I knew that Mrs. Adela always had food ready for me at 7:30, even though I had never asked, and she had never mentioned it. It simply appeared, and I had stopped being surprised by it, and started being grateful in that quiet way, where the gratitude lives in your chest, rather than your words. Mrs. Adela was not in the kitchen when I arrived that evening. I noticed it immediately. The kitchen was the first warm thing I encountered every evening when I came through the door, the smell of whatever she was making reaching me before I had even taken off my jacket. And that evening there was no smell, no sound, no small figure moving efficiently between the stove and the counter. just a note on the kitchen table in her neat handwriting that said, "Supplier delivery, back by 9, there is food in the pot." I ate alone. The house was quiet around me in the way it got sometimes, not empty, but aware, like it was paying closer attention than usual. My task for the evening was the library on the second floor. A delivery had arrived that afternoon, Mrs. Adela had written at the bottom of the note. Wooden crates in the library, books mostly, need cataloguing in the ledger before the end of the week. I took my tea upstairs with me and spent the first hour working through the crates methodically, lifting each book carefully, noting the title and condition and approximate date in the ledger, stacking them in the order he preferred. Some of them were extraordinary. Books in languages I did not recognize. Books with covers worn so soft with age they felt like skin. Books with handwritten notes in the margins in the same handwriting, page after page, annotation after annotation. The thoughts of someone working through an idea across what looked like decades. I did not think too carefully about whose handwriting it might be. The last crate was pushed to the back and slightly apart from the others, like it had been placed there separately and deliberately. Smaller than the rest. Plain dark wood without any of the shipping marks the others had. And on the lid, carved rather than printed, a symbol I did not recognize. Circular, intricate, with lines that crossed in a pattern that made my eyes want to slide away from it, like it was resisting being looked at directly. I should not have opened it, I knew that. I want to be very clear that some part of me, the part that had survived 6 weeks in this house, by respecting the boundaries of things that were not mine to know, understood immediately that this box was not mine to open. I opened it. Inside, resting on dark cloth, was a photograph. Old, black and white, the edges worn soft and slightly curved from years of being handled. The kind of photograph that has been picked up and put down so many times that it has absorbed something of the person who kept returning to it. 2 men, standing side by side in clothing that did not belong to any decade I could identify from memory. The man on the left was unfamiliar. Serious face, very straight posture, the kind of stillness in old photographs that makes people look like they were holding their breath for the camera. The man on the right, I brought the photograph closer to the lamp. The man on the right had black hair and high cheekbones and dark eyes and a jaw that could have been carved from something harder than bone, and he was looking at the camera with an expression so familiar that my chest tightened before my brain had finished processing what I was seeing. It was him. Not someone who resembled him, not a relative with similar features. Him. The same face I had been carefully not looking at for more than 3 seconds at a time for 6 weeks was looking back at me from a photograph that was old enough to belong in a museum. The same, exactly the same. Not older, not younger, the same. I was still holding it when the library door opened. I turned around very slowly. Mr. Martin stood in the doorway. His eyes went from my face to the photograph in my hands, and something happened to his expression that I had never seen happen to it before. Not anger, not quite. Something older than anger and more complicated. Something that moved through his face, like weather moving through a landscape, changing everything briefly and then settling back into stillness. But the stillness was different now. There was something in it that had not been there before he walked through the door. "I am sorry," I said. "It was in the crate with the books. I did not know it was there until I opened it, and I should not have opened it. I know that. I am sorry." "Put it down," he said quietly. I put it down on the reading table. He crossed the room and closed the box, not roughly, carefully, with a deliberateness that told me he had handled this box many times before, and rested his hand flat on the lid and stood there. The library was very quiet. The lamp burned between us, and outside the window the city was dark and distant and indifferent, and inside this room there was just the 2 of us and the closed box and the weight of something I did not yet have all the pieces to understand. "How old are you?" I asked. I do not know why I asked that. The question was already out before I had decided to ask it, pushed forward by something that was not quite bravery and not quite recklessness, but something in between that only exists at moments like this one, when the atmosphere in a room has already shifted past the point where careful questions feel honest. He did not answer immediately. He looked at his hand resting on the box. Old enough, he said finally, that it stopped feeling like a number. I looked at the side of his face, the sharp line of his jaw, the way he was holding very still, the particular quality of stillness he had that was not the stillness of someone at rest, but the stillness of something that has learned to be very careful with itself over a very long time. The man in the photograph, I said carefully. The one standing next to you. Who was he? Another silence, longer this time. Someone who made me what I am, he said, a long time ago. He picked up the box, turned to leave. And I do not know what came over me in that moment. 6 weeks of careful 3-second limits and east corridors that did not exist, and questions I had filed away without asking. But something in me refused to let the moment close without one more question. Just one. Was it your choice? I asked. What you are? He stopped. He did not turn around. Just stopped, completely, in the way that a very still thing becomes stiller, and the quality of the silence in the room changed again, became something I could feel against my skin, and then in a voice that was quiet and even, and somehow the most unguarded thing he had said to me in 6 weeks of evenings. No. He left. The door closed behind him. The library settled back into its amber quiet, and I stood next to the reading table with my hand resting where the box had been, and I stayed there for a while, just breathing, just letting the weight of that single word sit in the room with me. No, not chosen, not elected, made. By the man in the photograph, standing so close to him in a picture old enough to have forgotten what decade it came from. I finished cataloging the books because there was nothing else to do and because my hands needed something to do while my head worked through what had been handed to me. Mrs. Adela found me in the kitchen at 9:30, sitting at the table staring at my tea like it contained information. He told you something, she said. Not a question. A little, I said. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table and looked at me with that expression she had, the one that said she knew considerably more than she was going to tell me, but that she had assessed what I needed right now and had decided it was not information. He doesn't do that, she said simply. In 31 years, I can count on one hand. I looked at my tea. Mrs. Adela, I said, am I in trouble? She was quiet for a moment. Then she patted my hand once, gently, and said, probably, but not the kind you are thinking of. At 11, I came downstairs with my jacket and stopped. Mr. Martin was in the entrance hall. He had never been in the entrance hall when I left. Not once, in 6 weeks. He was always upstairs, or in the study, or somewhere in the deeper quiet of the house. But he was standing in the entrance hall with something in his hand, and when I reached the bottom of the stairs, he held it out, without looking directly at me, a key. Small. Plain ring. Unremarkable in every way, except for the fact that it was being held out to me by someone who did not do unremarkable gestures for unremarkable reasons. Side gate, he said. Shorter walk to the main road. It is safer at night. I took the key. The metal was cold in my palm. He nodded once and walked away before I could say anything, and I stood in the entrance hall alone, holding a key to his house and trying to understand what it meant that he had thought about my walk home, had noticed my route, had at some point decided that my route was not safe enough and done something about it without being asked and without making it into anything more than a practical matter stated in a practical voice. Side gate, shorter walk, safer at night. I used the key on the way out. The side gate opened smoothly, and the route to the main road was indeed shorter and indeed better lit, and I walked it with the key still in my hand, because I did not want to put it in my pocket yet. I was most of the way home before I realized I was holding it the way you hold something you are afraid of losing. I was not afraid of losing a key. I was afraid of what it meant that someone had given it to me. And I was more afraid of what it meant that receiving it felt in my chest, in that quiet place, beneath words where the true things live before you are ready to say them, like being chosen,